Hey folks, it's your friend Ashton, and welcome to the Rooted Rebellion podcast, the show that's reshaping the food system from the ground up. Hey friends, and welcome to another episode of the Rooted Rebellion podcast. Thank you so much for taking your time to support a cause that you care about. I appreciate that even with your busy schedule and the inevitable overwhelm posed by the state of our world, you're focusing on what's in your control and working toward a food system that benefits us all. Before we get into today's episode, I want to take a second to share a little bit more about the podcast Substack. As you may already know, we have recently launched a Substack, so there are even more ways to connect to the Rooted Rebellion podcast and learn more about your local food system. When you subscribe to this podcast Substack, you're going to gain free access to one weekly companion article posted alongside the podcast episodes, a new platform where you can listen to the podcast, a group chat feature with followers of the show, and specialized short-form content to help you connect to your food community and what's on your plate. I'll be sure to include the Substack link in today's show notes. So if you're interested, click that link, subscribe to the podcast on Substack, and I can't wait to see you there. Folks, I want to be real for a second. I am a historically very positive person, but even I can admit things are looking a little bleak right now, and I won't try to sugarcoat that. This show seeks to offer hope in one area that our society desperately needs help, but it doesn't address all injustices or provide solutions to all the problems that are facing us. I don't need to fill you in on recent events. I'm sure we've all spent enough time doom scrolling, watching the news, or have just felt the general weight of our day-to-day reality. And one of those areas I know includes an economy that is really not at its best. For anyone who has tried to seek employment lately, I'm sure you know firsthand, the job market is a trash fire. Gas prices and grocery bills are soaring, and I know that many of us are struggling all the more just to make ends meet. So when we have conversations about the local food system or supporting certain food practices, I understand that at times it might feel a bit tone deaf or privileged, especially when we know that we have neighbors starving in other parts of the world. So I just want to take a second before we chat today to acknowledge the privilege that comes with freedom of choice when it comes to choosing what we put on our plate. And it's something that I hope none of us take for granted. With that in mind, today's topic is going to cover how we support a local food system in the midst of economic crisis. In other words, how do we eat locally on a budget? I think this question is fairly unique to where we are in history. Historically, years ago, you would be eating locally anyways, as locally as possible. You would be growing your own garden, providing largely your own sustenance. Now we are so disconnected from our food system that we are paying outrageous prices for food that we're not comfortable with how it was produced. We may not even know how it was produced, and our environments and our physical and financial well-being are suffering for it. So usually when we discuss some of these ways of supporting a local food system, I almost feel like we can other those who are in financial struggle or expect those who aren't already eating locally to bear the burden of a pretty marked price difference, or we can expect others to try to support a robust local food system when really they're struggling to put any food on their table. So I want to give that disclaimer. And today I also want to provide some tips for how we can support a local food system on a budget. This is not an end-all be-all financial guide for eating locally, nor is it a lesson in finances, but it is tips and tricks that I have found in my own efforts to support local food that can help to offset the cost that often come with supporting local producers, which, let's be clear, it is not the fault of local producers that their prices tend to be above that of industrial farms and producers. Okay, we cannot expect a labor-intensive small farm of 20 acres to meet the supply or the methodology of a farm that's 200,000 acres and using high-tech, harmful methods that cut costs. So, what can we do as consumers? We can choose to source responsibly within our means. And that's what I want to talk about today. So, today I'm going to give you 6 tips to help you or your loved ones eat locally on a budget. Let's dive in. For someone on a fixed income that's trying to eat locally, the first thing I would suggest is to consider your priorities. In other words, ask yourself what is most important to you. Now, when I ask that, I'm not forcing you to choose between eating locally and keeping the lights on in your home. That is not the question that I'm asking. But rather, what are your motives for eating locally and how can you achieve them? So, are you eating locally for the sake of supporting a local economy and a resilient food system? Are you seeking organic or permaculture practices? Maybe you're even supporting a specific farm in your area. So, for me on this topic, my bottom line priority for supporting local food is humane animal treatment. Now, I have a lot of other motives when it comes to eating locally. But the one thing that I just can't stomach is factory farmed meat. Coincidentally, it is also one of the most expensive items to purchase locally. So, how do I reconcile that if I am eating on a budget? Which I'll be honest, I have been in recent months. Because locally sourced meat, specifically high quality, such as grass fed beef or truly free range chicken, can be a little pricier, sometimes it's easier for me to opt for a vegetarian diet. In full transparency, I am not an aspiring vegetarian. I really enjoy meat, and I think that our environment benefits from thriving, regenerative meat production. However, as I've said, it is more expensive to purchase meat locally, typically. There are more resources that pour into it, more care, more time, and I think that is an incredibly fair price difference, and it's one that I'm happy to pay. But if I'm eating locally, I prioritize my money towards local meats if I need meat, or in purchasing local vegetables or staple foods such as legumes or pasta. I think considering your priorities is important because, again, eating locally from you might look very different than it does for me. You might choose to allocate your funds towards organic practices, and you would be totally right to do so. But for me, again, it is about humane animal treatment. And I find that if I am purchasing factory farm meat, which I haven't done for some time, even if I were to make that purchase, it's something I can't even stomach the meat once I have it. So buying factory farm meat while at a discounted price, it could help me financially. It's not really something that I am able to do on an ethical level, but that is no judgment if you need high animal protein and that is the route that you choose to take. Considering your priorities might also mean that you look at your budget and consider what cost you can cut in other areas of your life. For me, if it was my choice, even though I have an espresso machine at home, I would be sitting at my favorite local coffee shop every day. And while I do want to continue to support that coffee shop, I would rather give some of my resources to local farms. And so I'm able to cut out a few of those lattes in order to purchase produce locally. So I think considering your priorities in this sense is a really great way to send you back to your why of local eating and help you get in touch with the reason that you have chosen to eat locally and support a local food system in the first place. My second tip would be to grow your own food. This one might seem a little obvious, or it might not even occur to you. What is more local than what grows in your backyard? And I think under this one, I would also include foraging. As I said earlier, we're in a relatively novel point in history that the average household does not produce its own food. That's almost becoming a lost skill, which is incredibly tragic to me. And I won't even say that I'm great at it. I put out my first garden last year. I was 24. I'll be putting out another garden this year, and it's still something that I'm very much learning. But I am a firm believer that, especially when you're working with the ecosystems around you, you never stop learning. So, maybe later, if you're later in life and have never planted a garden, I would urge you to come to it with the mind of a student and to not feel shame for what you don't know at any point in your life. I think the benefits to growing your own food are pretty evident. So it's cost effective. Most seed packets, if you're starting them from seed, cost $1 or something. Like, it is the most effective cost wise with the ability to gain profit. It's very easy to produce more food than you will need. And if it's more food than you're going to eat immediately, you can it or freeze it, preserve it somehow for later seasons, or you're going to be able to maybe sell that at a farmer's market or to your neighbors. It's a direct connection to your food system, but it also provides you with a new type of currency. Maybe you are bartering it with a friend, or maybe just sharing it with others, because folks, I think something we need to remember in these times, it's not our sole responsibility to feed our neighbors, but it is our duty to be looking out for one another. So if you have extra on your plate, I encourage you to share it. As for growing your own food, I know it can be daunting, but there are so many resources out there now. My brother-in-law likes to refer to YouTube University, meaning that there's just so much that you can learn simply by going on YouTube and seeking out resources. I'll link a couple videos in the show notes that have been really helpful for me. A book I would recommend that is incredibly helpful, I'll link that as well, is The Rooted Life by Justin Rhodes. It talks about his journey in homesteading, and it, in addition to being kind of a philosophic and emotional journey, it also has some phenomenal resources that helps describe the different types of home gardening and how you can get started. It was actually one of the resources that I turned to when I started my own home gardening journey. So I'll be sure to link that below. I think we can be upfront. Growing your own food does have the unfortunate drawback of delayed gratification, but even more so, delayed food on your table. If you're hungry today, having a salad, 3 or 4 months from now is not going to do you a lot of good. So, I think, it's important to realize that there are short-term fixes for today, and you're setting yourself up really well for the future. My boyfriend likes to say this old adage all the time, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. So I would say do what you can. And I would also encourage to start small. Like anything else, it is a new skill, and it is one that can be incredibly humbling. At least it was for me, because there are things about planting a garden and growing your own food that I think are so intuitive. When I get my hands in the soil, it almost feels like it's this remembered practice. It's almost as if I can feel like the ancestors with me who did it for generations before. But at the same time, there are many things that you have to fail to learn. So keep in mind that you're planting your garden, you're going to fail to some extent. And I think maybe that's a good lesson for all of us, even though it's a tough pill to swallow. So start small and accept failure. Maybe grow herbs in your windowsill. Or I'm about to start planting carrots in a 5-gallon bucket. And who knows how that's going to turn out. Please stay posted to the Instagram, because I'm going to have lots of footage of that fun little foray. Speaking of foray, as I mentioned, foraging is also a really great way to eat locally on a budget, and it costs nothing except a hospital bill if you do it improperly. So make sure that you are seeking the right resources and learning. The best resource for learning to forage is someone who is experienced being there with you. We have a really great episode from last season featuring the ladies of Wild Wanderers. That's a foraging group in Montana. They make their whole business helping others learning to forage and selling foraged goods. So I'll link that episode in the show notes, as well as their website. If that's something you're interested in, maybe even reach out to those folks. But I would also suggest looking for foraging guides in your area, or just any resources that are region specific. I can't emphasize that enough. So maybe venture into foraging with caution. It has a lot to offer. My third tip, I think, is pretty self explanatory. I think it's something that we're all doing a lot of these days. And for that, I would say compare your prices. Here's a fun trait about me. If I go to any sort of vendor event, be it a farmer's market, an art fair, if I walk into a booth of any kind, and especially if I make eye contact with the owner or the employee of that booth, I feel automatically obligated to purchase something. You know, the little girls with their friendship bracelets love to see me coming because I'm going to clear them out. And maybe that's you too. Maybe you are also a sensitive soul that hates to see the look of disappointment in the vendor's eyes or the farmer's eyes. But I will say this, it is okay to leave a booth at the farmer's market or a stall at the farmer's market and not purchase anything. In fact, I would encourage you when you visit a farmer's market, especially if it's your first time, to mill about. You know, I would do a thorough walk through, get to know the farmers at each booth, and just see what they have to offer and see what their prices are. It can vary pretty widely depending. I know some farmers markets set a price floor so that farmers aren't trying to undercut one another. I've encountered a few of those, but otherwise there is a healthy spirit and air of competition at a lot of farmers markets. Not cutthroat, but in the sense of, you know, people trying to make a living and honor themselves with a livable wage. And it's not disrespectful to seek different prices at these places and to see what is within your budget, which if I haven't said it already, if you're trying to eat locally, you do need to have a budget. For me, it's hard to stay within a food budget, especially because, you know, food is one of the things that brings me so much joy and it's very easy to overspend, but you got to know what you're working with here. So consult that budget and see what prices that these farms have to offer, because some will have discounts, some might be cheaper than the others. But with that, I would caution that you do get to know your farmer. Not only does that open the door for a relationship, but it's going to let you know who is there with products that they have tended themselves, who is reselling goods that are, you know, from out the nation. Some farmers markets only allow producers to sell. Others that I have worked for and attended allow a lot of resale. And at that point in my mind, you might as well be at Walmart because you have no idea where these products come from or the growing practices there. So I just advise that you exercise an air of caution when it comes to seeking products simply for the sake of a low price, even at farmers markets. In a similar vein, number 4, ask for seconds. So for those of you who don't know, produce does not typically come out in this beautifully picturesque, blemish-free shape that you're going to see in most aisles of the supermarket. Folks, food is funky, okay? It can look a little odd and taste no less amazing for that. So, depending on your farm's growing practices and their marketing, they may offer seconds. I have worked at a few different farms. One organic farm that I worked at in particular kind of upheld this myth of perfect looking produce, which I did not super appreciate personally. Their seconds, so all the food that maybe looked a little odd or had some sort of flaw was typically donated, which I am really grateful that they did donate it. But again, there is a lot of waste that happens, even in some of these local food businesses. So some farms might be willing to sell you what are known as these seconds at a discounted rate. I've even worked at some farms where they gave away, and I don't mean donate, just offered to the public seconds. So I would really encourage you to reach out to your farms, whether it's at the market or a phone call, and just see what their practices are on seconds. If they offer those at a discounted rate, or like I said, the odd farm might even offer it for free, because that can make a huge difference. And almost always these seconds are perfectly edible in great condition, but they just might not be super aesthetically pleasing and therefore are harder to market to customers. So definitely would encourage you to give that a try. Our next tip, number 5, is to only buy what you need. Check yourself before you wreck yourself, folks. Okay, I want you to picture this with me. You're at the farmer's market. You're surrounded by rows and rows of lovely produce. There's festivity in the air. You're supporting a cause you love, and you're happy to be spending your money. You buy something from the first vendor, then the next, then the next. You don't have immediate plans for what you're buying, but you're sure you'll get around to using it. Fast forward 1 week later, and most of your lovely produce is rotting in your fridge. Sound familiar? If you're anything like me, when I go to the farmer's market or even the right grocery store, I get so caught up in how excited I am to be purchasing and supporting a local producer and the idea of all the meals that I could make with the ingredients that I'm overzealous in my consumption. I think this is largely a product of the consumerist society that we find ourselves in. It's not only produce that we are over consuming. And while it's true that your money is going to a worthy cause, if you're on a fixed income or a budget, you can't afford to be overspending on food that won't even be eaten. I think this brings us to another important lesson of waste that comes with over purchasing food. So much of the food grown in this nation is never even consumed. So while it's admirable to be spending your money locally, you want to make sure that you're still using the produce that you purchase. Here's how I try to keep myself in check. Impetuous spirit that I am not always a huge fan of planning in advance, and I certainly didn't think meal planning would be for me, but it has been an absolute game changer in my life. For one, it ensures that I'm actually going to be using the food that I purchase, and it prevents me from purchasing more than I'll be able to consume because I know exactly what dishes each ingredient is going to go into. This saves you money, and once you become better at it, it also helps you to efficiently plan for the meals and the weeks ahead. I find that it's even helped me to eat locally more simply because I'm making provisions for the meals that I'm going to be having that week and I know exactly what ingredients I need. And I think meal planning will look different for everyone. For me, I just pull up the Notes app on my phone and brainstorm a breakfast, a lunch, and a dinner. I don't have every meal planned out to a T, but it's really helpful for me to at least have a roadmap of what I will eat for the week. And if you are trying to eat locally, I would encourage you to even see what meals you can plan strictly from the market if it is within your means. I think that's another way that helps you to shop locally and be intentional in your spending. One of the most important tips for eating locally within a budget is number 6, and that is to accept your limits. If you're anything like me, it is not always easy to accept your limitations. I know for myself, I have values that I actively strive to live, and I'm always trying to improve. So if I'm trying to eat locally, I want as much locally produced food on my plate as possible. But as we've already acknowledged, there is a very real the reality is that locally produced is more expensive than what you're going to find on most convenience store shelves. And while I'm not going to advocate for a convenience-based diet or to do your shopping strictly from big stores, from large chains, we have to be realistic about where we're at, both financially, with our time, and our ability to procure and prepare locally sourced ingredients. Now, I do think that there are sacrifices that you can make, and a lot of times the obstacles that we create for ourselves are purely mental. However, it is okay to accept that you are not eating a locally produced or sourced meal. It is okay if you don't have the funds or any of the other countless resources it takes to have a farm to table lifestyle. And it's important, I think, to acknowledge that, just as we farm in seasons, we live in seasons. While you might not be able to afford certain ingredients now, let it be a goal or a source of growth mindset for what you're striving to achieve in the future. I think it's very easy to beat ourselves up about what we're able to obtain, what we're able to achieve, and what we're not. And the reality is that sometimes you're going to fall short of your goals, including how much you support a local food system. And that's okay. And if anyone is degrading you for your inability to do that, think it's time to get some new people in your life because as bleak as things already are, we do not need excess negativity. So while I'm here to help support you in your local eating journey and help provide you with resources to obtain locally produced food, I am not about to preach at you or to diminish your commitment to the cause based on your current circumstances being less than desirable. So I hope that these tips were helpful for you. I'm really eager to hear if you have any other ideas or suggestions for people who are in a similar situation, whether it is financial hardship or maybe they're just learning to eat locally for the first time. The Rooted Rebellion podcast is here to help facilitate those goals and help you to remember just how much power is in your food choices. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please, please, please follow and rate the show. It helps us to spread this mission to other people who need to hear it. Please check out the show notes that are going to have some valuable links to other resources, including the Substack. Again, just to remind you, the Rooted Rebellion podcast Substack is yet another way to support this show and the mission of Orion Farmstead and the Rooted Rebellion podcast. It's going to provide further ways to connect and further ways to educate yourself. So please do us all a favor, subscribe, follow along the show, stay connected, and stay rooted. Folks, I'll see you next time. Thank you for joining me.